So I recently restarted playing Resident Evil 4 for approximately the 20th time. It might be my most replayed game ever outside of Ratchet & Clank Up Your Arsenal. Nearly every second of that game has been burned into my brain, but I hadn't touched it since 2012. As such, it had been just long enough that my memory of it was a little hazy. Enough so that I was slightly worried that it might not be as good as I remember it. Or at least as playable after having spent so much time with more modern and refined shooters. However, much to my surprise, it has not only aged flawlessly, but it might actually be better now, a full 15 years after its release, than it was on launch. There's a couple reasons for this. Perhaps the biggest one is the fact that its shooting mechanics, the same ones it pioneered, feel far crisper and better thought out than potentially any other shooter to date. Despite what you might think, the inability to move while aiming adds a massive layer of depth and strategy to the gameplay, because it makes you incredibly considerate of something most shooters leave by the wayside: positioning. The concept is usually brought up when talking about MOBAs, fighting games, and occasionally MMOs, but skilled RE4 play demands mastery of positioning. The inability to move while aiming means that even the fastest, most accurate player still has to carefully choose where to begin aiming. Realistically though, due to tight ammo supply and the fact that each bullet can trigger a pain state, and potentially an AoE kick that is by far your most useful early game tool, it will most likely take you a moment to aim because you do not want to miss. And while you're aiming, enemies are closing in on you. And because each enemy is equipped with a devastating melee attack that can take up to a third or half of your health, so you can't simply ignore them, no matter how low they are on the totem pole. The constant need to manage positioning, aiming, ammo, health, and crowd control means that no matter how good you are, things stay tense, and therefore engaging. But if it's not the shooting, it's the level design. I say this with complete earnesty. Resident Evil 4 may have the best level design I have ever seen. Literally every zone offers a new and distinct challenge. Let's take a super quick look at the entirety of Chapter 1 starting from the village. You have a massive ambush even by late game standards that requires you to block off entrances, a barn where you're not sure where every enemy is at and have to seek them out, boulder run, enemies with explosives attacking from behind traps and cover, sniping practice and bottomless pit knockdowns, combat from indoors behind cover, close quarters combat with Dr. Salvador, return to the village where you'll most likely get trapped in this narrow corridor, combat from downhill, foreshadowing, ducking in and out of combat using plane drops, giant fish. Jesus. I could do this all day, and even go into super specific examples like how you can see a yellow herb through a crack in the dog maze, creating this risk-reward trade-off, or how you're rewarded with treasures for experimenting by shooting the lanterns in this cave, but you get the idea. Every area in this game is a set piece, and not in the Modern Warfare 3 way. There are no areas in this game that do not hand you some unique toy box to play with, and it's brilliant. All of this, however, is rather well documented. The game is legendary for its shooting, and while its level design should be better appreciated, it's never been called into question. What it was that really surprised me though on this recent playthrough was the fact that Resident Evil 4 has so many things that in any other game would have been miserable to deal with, but for one reason or another, work in here. The most surprising of which is...
Don't worry, Ashley! I'm coming for you!
Ashley is a game-long escort quest. I don't think I'm going to rustle any feathers by saying that escort quests historically are the worst thing on the planet, on par only with pineapple pizza. However, Ashley not only never feels like a chore, but it feels beneficial to keep her around far more often than not for a couple of reasons. The most obvious benefit is letting you access areas that otherwise wouldn't be accessible. Every time you use her to get into a new area, you, on some level, are at least a little grateful that you have her with you. As a matter of fact, there's this really clever little section where you enter, sans Ashley, into the castle. There's this giant person-sized window just begging you to send her through. But she's nowhere to be found. Why don't I have Ashley with me? However, after reclaiming her later on, you are free to travel back to this section and send her through that window, to unlock a room that is not only filled with tons of treasure, but the incredibly expensive and useful Broken Butterfly. Thank God for Ashley. Even beyond this, she provides a subtle piece of moment-to-moment usefulness. You see, when you're in the run animation, Leon doesn't really look around all that much, but Ashley does. Anytime you run by an enemy, she turns her head, letting you know where it is in relation to you when you otherwise might not, especially if they're off screen. She's your human radar. And even if she still didn't provide these things, she'd still be one of the best game companions ever just because she stays out of your way. Whenever you aim, she immediately hides behind you. So to accidentally shoot her means going really out of your way. She's almost a non-factor, but a lax player will still definitely be reminded why they should be paying closer attention. In addition, you are always given the option to leave her behind momentarily. This isn't a dominant strategy because she can get kidnapped, which serves as an instant fail state, but it can save you from moments of teeth-grinding frustration from massive AoE attacks. Perhaps most of all though is the fact that she gets re-kidnapped all the time. Absence makes the heart grow fonder, and it's hard to get frustrated with her when she's constantly disappearing. You could argue that that's frustrating in its own right, but I would say it adds dramatic tension. And it also lends itself to little moments like our one at the window where, why don't I have Ashley? Also, all of this is helped by the fact that Ashley is a pretty likable character in her own right.
Talk about near-death experience.
QTEs have earned a pretty terrible reputation. They are frequently lazily and terribly implemented and are often there to just create the illusion of gameplay rather than actually have gameplay. In certain cases, they can be game-ruining nightmares. Even some games I would give an A+ to fall prey to this. However, it works here for two reasons. A, QTEs are a core part of the gameplay. You use them constantly, you are purposely triggering them constantly, and as such, it doesn't feel out of place when they show up in cutscenes constantly. In addition, cinematic QTEs don't come in full force until later on in the game, so it's hard to begrudge the game for using them when it taught you so long ago that you should always be ready. Speaking of which, B, they serve an actual purpose. They're tone builders. There's been a lot of discussion as to whether or not Resident Evil 4 is actually scary. It is, but it is undeniably tense. Every game, and perhaps every artwork, trades on some kind of currency. Dark Souls trades on the feeling of success, Metroid trades on the feeling of discovery, and Persona 3 and 4 trade on character investment. Tension, though, is the primary currency the Resident Evil 4 experience trades on, and QTEs lend to that. Unless the save room music is playing, you need to be on guard, and that even includes the cinematics. These QTEs are there to keep the tension up at all times, and I, for one, earnestly believe it works. Which brings me to my next thing. This is where the game gets its reputation for not being scary. In spite of having a ton of things that are objectively scary, like this, and this, but admittedly, it also has things like this.
Well, I see that the president's equipped his daughter with ballistics, too.
And this.
Where's everyone going? Bingo?
And, Jesus Christ, this.
Let's see if you can survive this time.
This game is completely off the rails with its tone, but I've never seen any complaints that it's inconsistent, just that it's not scary, and fine, whatever, fear is subjective. But the thing is, the tone never shifts drastically unless the setting shifts with it. Like, the wackiest thing that happens in the village is a couple of quippy lines of dialogue. Meanwhile, the most absurd, campy thing that happens on the endgame island is, debatably, when this bottom-shelf Rambo begins sending exploding robots and sentient floating minigun drones at you while asking, "What do you fight for, Leon?" Or maybe it's the helicopter romp, or the zombie claw game, or maybe it's the fact that you have to use a special anti-Las Plagas rocket launcher to kill the big bad of the game. Either way, it's dumb and campy and I love it, and it serves a great purpose. As I said before, tension is the currency that Resident Evil 4 trades on, but tension is the only currency quickly loses its value. At best, you grow numb to it, and at worst, you get bored of it. The trick is you need to offset it. This is usually done with quiet time, and there's plenty of that here, but the thing is, Resident Evil 4 is crafted from the ground up to keep you on your toes. Several surprise attacks and sudden event triggers throughout the course of the game teach you that you're never really safe. So unless there's a typewriter in front of you, you are not safe, no matter how quiet it is. This is generally a good thing. But like I said, we have to diffuse that tension from time to time in order to keep it fresh and allow it to build back up, to keep it from becoming one note. Resident Evil 4 does this with camp. Pure, shameless camp. There's a lot I could say about camp and the nature of it, but that's another topic for another day. Suffice to say though, I believe it's one of the best ways to diffuse tension. By making everything seem a little artificial and absurd for that one moment where you can see the puppet strings, it sets you up for a fall for when the script decides to drag you back down into the hell you're actually residing in. It makes it feel really out of left field, even if it really isn't. Long story short, this game is basically all 3 of the Evil Dead movies wrapped into one, and it somehow works. Now, there's one last thing I would like to talk about before we go.
Leon, now!
Okay, I'm about to rapid fire some things, so here we go. One-hit kills work in game because they provide a dramatic spike in tension, and they're fairly easy to avoid if you're careful, making them worth the trade-off. The straightforward health upgrade system works because it makes you choose whether to give it to Ashley or Leon, and never makes you pay for it, creating a valuable collectible that incentivizes you to look around in an interesting choice rather than just forcing you to waste money on a basically mandatory upgrade. Shielded enemies are fun because you can break their shields. Unkillable Pursuer works because Pursuer is actually killable. Sewer works because it actually uses the sewer for gameplay purposes. Difficulty mode works because it adapts naturally to perfectly suit how well or not well you're playing. Hit scan enemies work because they have a massive wind-up animation and never hit you on the first shot. Generic economy and upgrades are worth it because it gives a justification to explore, incentive to kill more enemies, thereby emphasizing the more action-based approach compared to previous entries in the series and letting us have the merchant who is objectively the best part of the game. Jesus Christ. I could sit here all day picking apart why Resident Evil 4 works as well as it does from a moment-by-moment basis, and point out all the ways it works in ways we may not expect it could work. And there is a chance I may actually do that someday, but we'd be here forever if I did that right now, and I'm not fully equipped to do it at the moment, to be honest. And for all I could describe what makes this game great, the most important thing is this. If you're someone like me who has grown a little fatigued by modern third-person shooters and all of the baggage that comes along with them, but still love to play the genre, go replay Resident Evil 4. It might just remind you why you fell in love with the genre in the first place.
Is that all, stranger? Is that all? I'll buy it at a high price. Thank you.